The Midnight Selkie, Chapter 5. The dolphin therapy became a sort of ritual. It was one that Raleigh was quite happy with. In truth, his parents seemed just as happy, as did Dr. Salem. After about 2 weeks of something as simple as having his feet in with the dolphins, he seemed less stressed around the notion. Even the pool, which had frightened him those first few days, became a comfortable place to sit. After all, his new dolphin friends were in that water. One morning, things started as usual for Kiana and Malcolm. Malcolm was already sipping his cup of coffee and reading the morning paper. As usual, Kiana had a song in her heart, and she was very free in letting it lift from her lungs. Her song was interrupted, however, by the stomping overhead and a cry. Down the stairs came rushing Raleigh. He stormed into the kitchen and about crashed into the kitchen chair. "Mom! Dad! What is it?" Kiana asked frantically, worried that something horrible had happened to her son. "You're still in your pajamas," Malcolm observed. Normally, Raleigh was already dressed before coming to join them for breakfast. But indeed, he was still in his pajamas this particular morning. "I'm dry," Raleigh declared. "Dry? You mean," Kiana began, "I didn't wet the bed. I started out having a bad dream, right? But then it got better. And when I woke up, I was dry." "Wonderful," she praised. "It's about time," Malcolm replied, taking another sip of his coffee. "Now you're taking a step into the world of being an adult." "Oh, stop, Malcolm," Kiana scolded. "That sounds so degrading." "We're not in the clear yet," he replied. "He managed to skip the pissing today, and I'm grateful for that. It's the first time in 7 years that boy has had a dry bed in the morning. Now, can he wake up tomorrow and be dry? How about the next day, and the next?" "The healing process takes time, Malcolm," Kiana frowned. "I think I'm doing really good," Raleigh insisted. "Maybe sometime soon I'll be able to sit on the ladder in the pool." "Well, as far as that is concerned," Malcolm began, "I'm not worried. I'm more focused on you getting sleep and staying dry." He turned to face him. "What is it that you're afraid of?" Raleigh frowned, biting his bottom lip as he thought about it. "Raleigh! Raleigh! Raleigh!" Dr. Salem called. The boy was brooding again. He was still sucking and biting on his bottom lip. He finally became semi-focused and raised his gaze to the therapist. "Huh? What's wrong? You've been off in space for most of your visit." Raleigh sat back with a heavy sigh. "My dad asked me a question this morning, but I didn't have an answer for him." "And that bothers you?" Dr. Salem asked. "Of course it bothers me. I feel like a failure and an idiot when I can't give him what he wants. He's just that kind of man who needs answers." "What did he ask you?" "He wanted to know what it was about the water that I was afraid of." "But isn't drowning enough?" "Don't you know how to swim?" Dr. Salem asked. That was an odd sort of question. Raleigh didn't go into the water, so how would he know that? "Why not take swimming lessons? Why not walk the shallows of the beach?" "Swimming lessons. Maybe if they're private. But I don't know about the beach. The sea is my ultimate fear. That's where that thing happened." "But you didn't drown. You wouldn't be out in the open sea. At least not now, if ever. But being on the beach shouldn't be that hard. What is out there besides the possibility of drowning? You can drown in a teaspoon of liquid, Raleigh." "That's not very encouraging." "It's reality. You know, we can all meet a devastating end at any time. A car could hit us. A plane could crash and land on top of us. Your house could come tumbling down. A parade of gremlins could pop out of the air vent and perform cannibalistic rituals with us. There are a lot of maybes and what-ifs in this world, Raleigh. It is perfectly all right to be cautious about things, But it is just insane to sacrifice a comfortable and happy lifestyle simply because of anything that could happen. Now, if it was a matter of poor health, like drugs or alcoholism, then yes, I could see avoiding it. But we're talking about water. So long as you take proper precautions, then everything should be fine. Nowadays, casual boat rides require life jackets. So a repeat of that should not happen again. You should float if you fall off a boat. It still scares me. Like skydiving, a parachute should open, but sometimes they don't. And even if they do, you can still get hurt. What if I fall off the boat and a shark comes? What if? What if? What exactly are you afraid of, Raleigh? Now you sound like my dad, Dr. Salem. And you've had plenty of time to think of an answer, haven't you? He smiled. Raleigh huffed out a sigh. He took a long moment to really consider what it was he was going to say. Sharks, giant octopus, sea monsters. I don't know. Anything in the sea can be deadly. Maybe a giant jellyfish will swallow me. Maybe the dolphins will take me further out to sea. Who knows? So it's the animals. I guess. Dr. Salem tapped his fingers together. Well, our time is up for today, Raleigh. Is there anything else you wanted to say? I personally think you should cheer up. You're not a failure nor an idiot. You're making wonderful progress. I think your father's dolphin therapy was a good idea. And you seem to be taking well to it. I like those dolphins. They're friendly. But they're in a controlled environment, too. The good doctor placed a hand on Raleigh's head. Yes, that is true. And when you learn to ride, Raleigh, then we can take off the training wheels. The beach was quiet and empty. The ebb and flow of the waves were a gentle lullaby to people of the coast, or anyone in range to hear it. It hummed with a sweet chorus of cries from the sky as seagulls circled about. Clouds painted the sky in long strips, allowing the evening sun to peek through conservatively. It was a miracle, really, for Raleigh to be standing in these sands. He had spent his early weekend afternoon working with his mother in the tavern. Being as she had another shift, and the crowd had dwindled a bit that day, he decided to wander. The tide was out. That was nice. It meant there were more sands to walk on and less water. The waves were very gentle when the tide was low. The air smelled so fresh. It was not purely a saltwater freedom, but it was mingled with the smell of the kitchens and mongers of beachside restaurants and businesses. But the further away he walked, the more virgin the scent of fresh sea breeze. He had no real idea about where he was heading, but he could walk a straight line and eventually be able to find his way from any direction. Behind him, off in the distance, he saw some children from a beachside residence playing in the sands. They were in their swimwear and t-shirts, tossing a beach ball to one another. Deep down, he wanted to be able to walk up to them and join them. But he didn't know those particular children. He wasn't familiar with them, and he was afraid of what they'd think. He could always lie, but eventually he'd be caught in it. He chose instead to be the coward he had always been. He turned around and headed in the direction he had originally been going, interested in the sands. Every so often, however, he'd peer out over the horizon. At one such glance, he became lost in thought, staring off into the oblivion. There was nothing out there to see, but his mind was locked into the scenic value of it. A part of him longed for it. Yet another part of him reminded him that he was not welcome in it. It made him hate himself. And for a moment, a stubborn flame flickered within him. With one step, then another, he came closer to the edge of the water. He was almost there. Almost. In the next instant, he heard a strange sound. When Raleigh turned to investigate, he saw a large dog galloping towards him. Before he could make any sort of reaction, he was knocked down, practically beaten down and trampled beneath the feet. He let out a cry and an oof. Eyes open, he saw the dog, sandy and sopping wet, standing over him. "Abby!" a familiar voice called. "Abby, girl, what are you doing now? Don't knock people over. They tend to frown on that." He rushed over, pushing the Portuguese water dog off the body. "I'm so sorry. She's harmless, really. She's just very friendly and excitable. I hope you're not hurt." He then gasped. "Raleigh! Oh, Raleigh, I didn't expect to see you down here." "Ben?" Raleigh asked, peering up to see the assistant veterinarian holding a hand down to him. He reached up, taking a firm grasp of the hand, and felt himself whisked up to his feet. "That dog feels like a battering ram," he said, brushing the sand off himself. "We come down here from time to play," Ben stated. "I like keeping her in working. I'm not into just the frills and ribbons. I want her to compete in an area she was bred for. So I send her out in the water. She gets very excited, though. Adrenaline and all, you know?" "I get it," Raleigh replied. "I would have never expected to see you down here, though," Ben admitted. "Were you hoping to see some wild dolphins?" "I'm not sure, really. My mom works at the Whitewell Tavern. I help out there. But there's really no need for me there, so I'm killing time." "This is a nice place to be if you want to get lost in time, Raleigh," Ben said with a big smile. "These sands and these waters are ageless. It's like they're hypnotic at times. I've come down here and sat down, just staring off into the vast nothing. Before I knew it, hours had passed. I was late for work twice." Both let out a friendly little laugh. Though older than Raleigh, and even older than Sarah, too, he began to see Ben as a big kid of sorts. He was like the big fun brother, and he had a much more pleasing personality than Sarah. And he kind of liked Ebby, too, despite being a big, lumbering, and ugly dog. This was a nice therapy, too. Ben had brought a large neon orange stick of some kind with him to the beach. It made it easy to see, and it would float. Between Raleigh and himself, they had a grand time throwing it into the rolling waves. Ebby, in turn, would gallop into the water like a steamroller, plowing against the current and undertow to retrieve it and bring it back. She would seem to skip as she would make her return onto the beach, showing off her prize proudly. And Ben's words rang true. They were so lost in their game that they weren't paying attention to how far they had wandered. The motion of tide and the changeless sands made everything look the same, no matter where they stood. It wasn't until the lighthouse came into view that the pair had realized they had wandered quite some distance. "Oh, crap! That's Porter's lighthouse!" Raleigh suddenly gasped, pointing to the large, towering structure resting on the edge of the beach. It was quite the stereotypical lighthouse. It was tall and white, resembling a giant barber's pole, with the red spiral flowing down the tower. The waves weren't able to reach it with the tide so low, but at full high tide the lighthouse would be assaulted by the remnants of broken waves crashing against the shore. "Porter's lighthouse?" Ben repeated, taking a good look at the structure. He removed his glasses and wiped them clean, as if it would make things magically different once he donned them again. Nope, it was still there. "It didn't feel like we'd traveled that far. Yikes." "Are you working tonight?" Raleigh asked. "No, but I still think it would be wise to start heading back. I don't want to be around here at night." "Afraid of the dark, Ben?" Raleigh teased. "I might turn into a werewolf," he replied jokingly. He let out a mocking howl towards the sky. That set Ebby off naturally. She turned up her head and howled with him. This made Raleigh laugh. Once the howling fest had finished, it allowed Ben to join into the laughter. "Are you coming?" "Nah. Aquaphobia or not, this beach only goes in two directions. If I manage to get to the end of the beach this way, that means home is in the opposite direction. I just have to stay out of the tide zone, and I should be okay." Eventually I'll come across some beach that I recognize. Your calm demeanor is admirable, boy, Ben chuckled. A lot of nuts come out at night. Do you want to keep Ebby for the night? She'll keep perverts and hippies away from you. Hippies? Ben only let out another round of laughter. I'm just pulling your leg, Raleigh. But really, would you want to keep Ebby with you? I'd hate to wake up tomorrow and find your picture on a milk carton. If that'll ease your conscience, Ben, then be my guest. But we don't have pets. I'm not sure we'll know how to handle a dog. No worries, she's housebroken, but she can also handle herself outside. She only barks when things look questionable. She knows how to behave at night. Are you sure she won't mind? I don't think she will. Raleigh gave a nod. All right, but how will I return her to you? I mean, Dad doesn't go to work on Sundays, and I don't know where you live. Does your mother work tomorrow? Yeah, church crowd and Sunday fishermen. Usually a nice steady day, Raleigh replied. Well, Ebby can be taken there. I don't live too far from there. I'll just come and get her. Okay. Raleigh found himself agreeing. Ben really wasn't giving him any choice in the matter. He didn't want him to worry. Anyway, Ebby was a nice dog, and it would be nice to have some company to talk to when he finally decided to turn back. It beat being silent or talking to himself, didn't it? Ben gave a wave as he turned, heading in the opposite direction. Ebby obediently sat beside Raleigh, awaiting any of his commands. Would he continue to play with her, or would she simply trot by his side? Raleigh peered down at her, petting her wet and coarse fur. Okay, girl. Let's go. A bark later, Ebby was on her feet, watching him intently as she walked beside him. Raleigh had never really been close to the lighthouse before. He had seen it in the distance, but never actually saw what a real lighthouse was made up of. So being a curious sort, he came closer. Though a cranky old man, Admiral Knight Porter was never said to be a particularly violent or territorial man. He was not the sort to yell at children if nothing of question was being done. Ebby began to sniff at a shed, digging a little in the sand, pulling out a bedpan. She held it up proudly, sitting up as if to show it off. Raleigh took a second glance. Ebby, put that down! Don't go snooping! With a whine, she put it back down in the sand. Come over here! Don't get into trouble! So she trotted to his side. The yard was a mess. There were boat parts here and lined there. The shed was in need of repair and a fresh coat of paint. A seagull perched on the bow of an old rowboat. It was dried up, weathered, and had a hole in the hull. It was junk. But it added a sense of stereotypical scenery to this nautical home. The tower was connected to a building that looked like a more traditional home. Raleigh had always thought that the keeper would live in the tower. He had never realized an actual house would be attached. Even more to his surprise, he noticed that there was a light on inside the house. It was rather odd. Admiral Knight Porter was known to visit the tavern quite often. Would he leave his lights on, even if he were absent? It wasn't as strange as it sounded. This lighthouse was old and probably had many things of value from the sense of antiquity. The Admiral was a wee bit of a pack rat after all. Everything had a memory, and he didn't want to give them up. So a light on would probably deter any snooping troublemakers. It made perfect sense. A small squeak made Ebby perk her ears. The sudden reaction got Raleigh's attention, and he glanced in the direction that her gaze was transfixed. From under a bucket propped against the house came a small calico kitten. She let out a little mew and flashed her green eyes towards these strangers. This turned out to be rather unwise. Ebby bounded forward and chased the cat up an old mast, knocking Raleigh backwards with a yelp into the sand. "What in the blue blazes is going on out there?" came an angry growl. Raleigh gasped. The Admiral was home. He tried to get up, only to fall back onto his face. He was caught. A rope had tangled about his ankle, so instinctually he wrestled with it, and tried to pull his foot free of the loop, but it cost him valuable time. Out came the Admiral, and it only took a moment for him to be seen. "You there! Boy!" "I wasn't making any trouble," Raleigh defended in a panic. "Knows you damn kids," the seaman sighed. "What are you doing here?" "We were playing on the beach," Raleigh replied. "We ended up here before we knew it. It wasn't intentional, but when we got here, I've never seen a lighthouse close up before." "Ah, and you wanted to take a peek, did you?" Nye laughed. He came over and unsheathed a large knife. Raleigh cringed and covered his head as he tensed. It was pointless. Nye bent down and cut the rope from the boy's ankle, freeing him. "Get up, boy. Come on inside." "Are you going to call the police?" "No. Get your dog and come inside. I'm going to show you a lighthouse up close." Without another word, he turned and headed back into the modest home. Raleigh sat a moment, and he processed the situation. Finding no other alternative, he gave a whistle. Ebby, growing tired of the cat on the roof, trotted back over. Following his lead, she traveled into the house after him. Inside, oil lamps and lanterns lit the house. It really gave an old-fashioned feel to the environment. It looked like a dusty old shed or attic, with an almost homey familiarity. A wooden table with simple wooden chairs dominated the front room, which was the kitchen. It had a slight fishy smell, but being as his diet would most likely have been mostly seafood, it made perfect sense. Admiral Nye Porter was well known as one of the best fishermen in town. "You'll have to forgive the mess. Wasn't exactly expecting company." Raleigh watched as Nye came about the table and sat down with a glass of soda. He slid it over to him and then sat back, making the chair creak. Ebby lay herself down under the table, being obediently silent. She was starting to get tired from her day's play. "Sorry for intruding." "Was there something you were looking for?" "No, I was just curious." Nye let out a hearty laugh. "That's so. That's a good thing, you know. That's a seaman a-waiting to be let loose." It is?" "I thought you were suffering from the A word, boy. Why are you on the beach?" "I've been trying to face my fears a little bit at a time." "How have you been doing that?" "Being stubborn, mostly," Raleigh chuckled nervously. "My dad has set me up with some dolphin therapy. He works in a biology lab. There are 4 dolphins there that I sit with. They make me not so nervous of the water." "You're not cured yet, boy," Nye stated. "But I guess that it's a good thing, what you're doing." He got up and motioned for Raleigh to do the same, which he did. "Follow me, boy. I'll show you something just as beautiful as dolphins. You cannot tell me that it will not set your heart alight." Raleigh came to stand beside Nye, bidding Ebby to stay under the kitchen table. The Admiral then led the boy through the house. There was a very small and sandy den. It had grassy green carpet, almost as if the grassy color were dying. And of course, it was stained with sand. There was a raincoat, rain cap, rubber boots, and waders hanging on one corner. There was an old rust-colored chair in the middle. A simple television sat atop the TV dinner table, crooked rabbit ears on top. An old-fashioned radio sat in the corner. In another corner, several more technical radios were set up. It gave the room a sense of clutter. It made Raleigh feel like the room was closing in on him. There was a doorway, but no door to one side. It was a bedsheet curtain, and it was pulled aside. The bedroom was dark and messy. The bed was unmade, and the comforter, made of quilt patching, dangled onto the floor. It smelled of smoke in the house. It was obvious that, though the corncob pipe was normally unignited in public, Nye smoked it quietly a bit here. Nye led him further, to the vast stairway on the opposite end of the house. "Up there, boy, is the eye of the lighthouse. That's what sees all out at sea. That is what those at sea
See.
That's the light, Raleigh said.
Yes. And that is the vantage point.
Come, he replied, waiting for no argument. Up the spiral stairs he went. Raleigh pressed himself against the wall and followed it in his ascent. The rail was rather flimsy, as if it had been rigged in an amateur manner. It was probably by Nye himself. But before long they had reached the top of the tower. Nye opened one of the glass doors and stepped into the rail-guarded balcony. Like any sort of buccaneer, he pulled out a telescope and stretched it out full length, holding it up and peering through the lenses.
Come here, boy. Look out there.
Raleigh obeyed, came to the rail, and took a look from his height. It was amazing. From here, it was like he could see forever. He could see a lot of the town. He could see clear down the beach. He could see far out to sea. The water was so beautiful. It reflected the sky, yet shimmered in its own radiance. Wow, was all he could breathe out.
Isn't she beautiful?
Nye asked, and held the telescope out to him.
Look through this. You can see even further out.
Raleigh hesitated a moment, and he contemplated the instrument. But curiosity, as had been the norm as of late, had gotten the best of him. He took the telescope and extended it once more. He tried to line up to where Nye had peeked before and took a gander. With the telescope, he was able to see Merrow Rock, the island off the coast of these beaches. It had several trees, a sort of forest reserve surrounded by beach and water. On the beach were several seals, sunbathing in what was left of the light. That's Merrow Rock.
Indeed it is.
There are a lot of seals on the beach.
Not as many as some evenings,
Nye replied.
Some nights there will be several dozen, and some nights there may only be one or two.
Where do they go?
To hunt. There are places to rest all over this area. Merrow Rock is the safest place in theory, but after a long trip into the open sea to hunt, any land will do to escape from sharks and whales.
You said they came here when you were young, Admiral. They seem to breed rather quickly. Nye glanced at him, or tried to with his squinted eye.
Prime living space, boy. It allows for good breeding.
Were you ever married? Raleigh asked. It was an odd transition, since they were talking about seals. But somehow, it seemed the thing to ask, even if perhaps it was inappropriate.
I had me a lovely young wife when I was but a lad.
Any kids? To that, he looked a little sad.
Yeah, I had a few.
Where did they go? Raleigh was careful. He wasn't sure how moody Nye could get, if at all. Did something happen?
It was a long time ago. They aren't around anymore. But that's all right. No need to pry any further, boy.
He ventured back into the light chamber and lit his pipe. Raleigh dawdled and took one last gander through the telescope. He then followed Nye, returning the instrument to him. You said another storm was coming. If the last one brought the seals here, will another storm drive them away?
I hope not. This place is special. They've been here a long time. I think by now they've decided that there is no place like home.
Nye gave the pipe a few puffs. He looked Raleigh over. The boy had been watching him, almost like a dog with wide eyes. It amused him. He didn't voice this notion, of course. He kept it to himself. But it was true nonetheless.
Come back inside. I think I have a tale that you'd like. Reluctant seaman.
My name is Raleigh, he insisted, and he chased after the Admiral as he descended back down the tower and into the modest house. Nye was silent the whole way down. He ventured into the den and sat in the old recliner and rocked gently.
Pull up a chair, boy.
Raleigh looked around. There was a stool over by the radios, so he took it and pulled it aside and in front of the chair. He wanted to face Nye as he spoke. He sat on it, latched his feet around the legs, and tucked his toes into the wood. He propped himself forward and held himself up with his hands on the edge of the stool. Nye watched him a moment. He'd soon find the position uncomfortable. Ah, youth. What? Raleigh asked, noticing that he was being stared at.
Nothing, boy,
Nye chuckled.
A long time ago, the seals came from the north. It was a very long and dangerous swim. Out in the open ocean, as I told you before, it's worse than any jungle you could ever imagine. A new territory needed to be gotten. The territory they once called home was now a dangerous place to be.
Was there a lot of hunting?
There was a high demand for rare seal skins, Nye replied. The seals alone were not the only ones to make this dangerous trek.
What else? Raleigh asked.
Boy, have you ever heard of a Selkie?
Raleigh thought on that. He had heard of many creatures in his life, both real and fake, that inhabited the sea. But even he was unsure of this creature. No? Is it kind of like a fish? Nye let out a hearty laugh.
Boy, what a silly thing to say. But I suppose if you do not know, then you cannot help such a silly answer. A Selkie is kinda like a seal. How open-minded are you, boy?
Very open-minded, I guess. I'm a kid. We have big imaginations.
That's good. Then you can imagine what I'm telling you when I say a Selkie is a fairy.
A fairy?
Indeed. They are enchanted creatures. They appear normally as seals. This makes them able to enjoy the world under the sea. The kingdom under waves. There's a whole magical world beneath the waves, so foreign to human beings. When the Selkies come ashore, they're capable of removing the sealskins and revealing a human-like form. It is said that on gentle midnights, they come ashore to dance in the moonlight to the music played by the merrows. You do know what a merrow is, don't you, boy?
Not exactly.
Ah, you're so uneducated. Merrows are mer people, boy. Mermaids and mermen. Normally, where you find Selkies, there are merrows nearby. Selkies will follow merrows, unwilling to go without their beautiful ritualistic music.
So you're trying to tell me that there are mermaids and seal people out there? Raleigh asked.
Ah, it's deeper than that, boy.
He sat back, cleared his throat, and puffed out smoke rings. He closed his eyes and let out a raspy hum. He normally did this before a grand story.
A long time ago, the merrows and Selkies inhabited only the shores of the Celtic Isles. They mostly inhabited Scotland. Superstitious people were rather happy to find one and keep the skins. This stranded the Selkies on land.
How so? If they're people, can't they swim out like people?
People are not made for the sea. It is possible for Selkies to enchant people and bring them under the sea, but Selkies are taught to swim as seals. Without their skins, they remain human. They have no idea how to swim or function as a human for long periods of time. And they certainly are not really aware of how to swim like one. In a sense, they become afraid of the water because they long for it, but cannot cope with the loss.
He paused only a moment and cleared his throat again.
If they were to ever find their skins, no matter how wonderful their lives on land are, they will return to the enchanted kingdom of the sea.
That sounds like a typical fairy tale, Raleigh stated.
There was one large group of Selkies. An alpha male dominated them. Black seals. They are free-spirited creatures, but they have a community hierarchy as well. This male was old-fashioned and stubborn. But don't you think too lightly, boy. He was strong and wise. His name was Hagen. His group was a very healthy one. But many of them felt that this would change if they remained in the territory. Many females would be abducted as human brides if they were caught without their skins. Other times they were mistaken for seals and hunted. Of course, the coexistence of man and magic was changing. One began to completely dominate the other. But Hagen would not permit his group to leave. He believed in old traditions and old ways. These, in his mind, would be lost if they left the land of their ancestors.
So what happened? Raleigh asked breathily.
Hagen had a terrible temper when he felt he was being betrayed or disobeyed. Now, there was a young male in the group by the name of Nautilus. He felt that he had to convince Hagen to allow the group to find safer territories. Since everyone else was afraid of the leader, Nautilus bravely became the spokesperson. He pleaded for Hagen to see reason. However, as you can probably tell, he refused. Many times, Nautilus repeated his plea, and many times he was refused. He was also trying Hagen's patience. Finally, Nautilus knew that he would have to challenge Hagen. Only then would there be a chance of escape from certain death. Needless to say, boy, when Nautilus pleaded one last time, and Hagen refused, a challenge was issued. Every Selkie in the group could feel the chill up their spines. Nautilus was much smaller than Hagen, and lacked much of the experience the old male kept. A huge, vicious battle broke out. Hagen had every intention of killing the mutinous scallywag.
Did he? Raleigh pleaded.
Ha! You're very enthusiastic, boy. For someone who dislikes the water, you sure get swept up in a good yarn.
Don't leave me hanging, he insisted. What happened? Did Hagen win? Did Nautilus die?
Wouldn't be a story worth telling if Hagen won that easily, would it, boy?
Knight chuckled.
Nautilus, against all odds, won the battle against Hagen. He ended up killing him in the process. That left the group with no leader. This left them in a quandary, you see.
Common sense would say that Nautilus would be the new leader. Isn't that how it works? Raleigh asked. When the dominant male is brought down by another male, the new male is the new leader?
In animal society, yes. But Selkies aren't exactly animal. You see, Hagen had a very young son, so a few members of the group wanted him to be the new leader. But that made no sense. Hagen's son was barely old enough to know anything worth knowing. Majority vote was, of course, for Nautilus to lead the group. His first order was to leave the territory in search of a new one. He called for the group to gather their courage and strength and to follow him into the big open sea. He insisted that a new, safer land was out there, waiting for them. All they had to do was try to get there.
Where was it?
He had no idea,
I replied.
No one did. It was blind faith, boy. Of course, many thought this was ludicrous. With such dangers out there, many of them would be killed on the journey. But if they stayed behind, they would give themselves up to be picked off.
So they went with Nautilus?
They went with Nautilus,
the Admiral confirmed.
And they traveled for a long time. And a few were not strong enough to make it. But if that were not bad enough, there was a storm a-brewing. Way out there in the sea, there was no place for the Selkies to take cover. They had no choice but to try to weather the storm and keep going. Then it came. It was the most treacherous storm they had ever seen in deep water. It lifted the waves miles high and brought them crashing down. All night, the storm threw everything in the sea here and there. and that is the way it remained. A true behemoth, a horrid leviathan. The very seas of hell were arising, and the battle raged on until the wee hours of the morning. By the time the first rays of sunlight peeked over the horizon, the storm had finally calmed. The sky spoke such lies as if it had never seen the blasted thing at all. But the beaches told another story entirely. They were littered with debris. Dead and injured bodies of aquatic life were all over the sands. It was painted with kelp and coral. The Selkies were, of course, among them.
Raleigh was silent a long moment, and he tried to picture the story as clearly as possible. How many made it?
14 Selkies survived being thrown into the beaches of Mirror Rock. 20 Selkies escaped Scotland. 6 never saw their new home. But the survivors claimed the area. Later, other seals, Merrows, and Selkies joined them.
A clock sounded, striking the hour. It was then that Raleigh was forced to realize the time.
Oh no, I didn't realize it was that late. Mom's gonna kill me. I could speed a boat up the tavern's beach area, boy,
Nye chuckled. Don't you have a car? Nye replied with wild laughter. Up he got and headed for the kitchen.
You calm down, boy. I'll give your mama a call so she doesn't worry her pretty head.
Raleigh began to fidget as he waited for the Admiral's return. Evie poked her head in, and then skipped to his side. She pawed at him as she sat on her haunches. He watched her antics with only limited amusement. I hope she doesn't get too mad. Evie let out a moan. It was somewhere between a whine, a growl, and a bark. This sound also greeted Admiral Nye Porter when he returned.
Your mama's gonna come and get you when she's finished up, boy.
Was she mad?
Nah, I took care of it. You and Toto just sit tight.
Her name is Evie.
Whatever,
the seaman shrugged. Would the Selkies still be around here, or is it really just a fairy tale? Raleigh asked after a long and uncomfortable silence.
You'll have to answer that for yourself. Does it matter?
I guess not, the boy shrugged. Nye studied him. In fact, he'd been studying him off and on for quite some time.
I have a theory.
About?
You.
He sat back down and chewed on his pipe a moment, gathering his thoughts.
You're afraid that no one will be there to save you next time.
Raleigh gasped, his eyes growing wide. How could he say such a thing? What?
You have a history with the sea. Why turn your back on it? Bad experiences shake even the strongest of men. You don't necessarily fear water. You fear the sea. Did the undertow sweep you out? Did you about drown? It turned out okay since you're still alive, but it was pure luck, wasn't it?
Raleigh frowned and lowered his head. I sank like a stone. Mom and Grandpa couldn't get to me.
Ah, how did you not drown?
Nye asked. It sounds stupid. Stuff like it only happens in books and movies.
I'm a yarn teller, boy,
Nye retorted.
You think you can top me?
Well, most of it is stuff Mom told me. My memory of it isn't very good. I can't really tell what is actually real and what is just some dream.
Ah, when you cannot decipher memories from dreams, it can affect your sleep. Might even cause some bed problems.
This made Raleigh pale.
With the bed?
How do you know all this stuff? Nye gave a warm chuckle.
I've been around for a very long time, boy. Now, you just go on and tell old Nye what happened to you.
A seal brought me back to the surface. It just let me grab onto it. A wild seal. And it brought me back up. It even took me back to the boat. It rescued me from drowning.
I see. Now that's a seaman's tale, even if it is small.
It is?
But ever since that day, it's been that aquafear crap.
Yeah, but I'm slowly getting better, Raleigh insisted, trying to defend himself to some degree.
Bah! You're not afraid of the water. I'm sure of it. You're just afraid that no one will save you. You don't feel you can trust your life to anyone, not even yourself. They let you down before, and you feel that will always be so. If not for that seal, you'd be dead. So you're worried that when danger comes, no one will be able to help you, and you'll not be able to help yourself. The fear was outlandish and unreasonable. Now it's slowly coming back into perspective. It's because of that I know you will return to the water.
Thanks for the vote of confidence, Admiral. It really makes me feel a lot better. It lifts my spirits and gives me a little more hope. And I got up and patted Raleigh on the shoulder.
You're old enough to be able to take care of your own proper precautions, boy. Soon, you'll know that you can make you safe. Maybe one day, you may help someone else feel safe too.
Were you afraid of the water once, Admiral? Is that how you know so much about me? He didn't answer right away. He stood by the window and stared out into the darkening exterior. He held his pipe, remaining very still, save to close his eyes. Finally, he spoke.
Once. I had an experience once. I forgot how to swim because of it. I love the sea. But I was so afraid of it. I was afraid that it would swallow me up and be so unforgiving. How can you enjoy her if you cannot stay afloat?
He then gave Raleigh a smile.
I was very determined, boy. I just couldn't go out like that. I faced those fears and conquered them. I learned how to swim all over again. Now look at me. I am the envy of every mariner that hears my name.
This was truly able to cheer Raleigh. If Nye could do it, then so could he. Perhaps one day he'd be the local legend when Nye was gone. Ebby suddenly perked her ears. Being a dog, she could hear sounds that humans could not. And she heard someone coming. She began to bark and rushed to the door as a knock came upon it. That seemed to put an end to all of the conversation. The visit was coming to a close. Alberni Porter opened the door and greeted Kiana and politely invited her in. Likewise, she politely refused. I hope he was no trouble, Admiral. He's a good boy. He normally doesn't wander like this.
No trouble at all, Nye chuckled. That boy is rather interesting if you ask me. I would kind of like to see more of him. He's a good sport.
I'm very glad everything is okay, she smiled. It was very kind of you to look after him. He's still my baby after all.
Mom!
Raleigh whined, which only made the adults laugh. Come on, Raleigh. Tell the Admiral thank you and good night. We need to get home. Your father will get worried if we're too late. Thank you for showing me the lighthouse, Admiral. Raleigh beamed. It was a lot of fun.
That was no problem, boy, Nye said loudly. If you ever want to hear more grand tales, drop by any time.
Raleigh beamed further and gave him an enthusiastic nod. He then darted outside past his mother, with Ebby barking as she chased after him.